Okay, so we showed a full run through of what we had done. We finished it all, we've pretty much got it, all the transitions pretty smooth. But that brought us to a discussion that we had with Mrs. Shipp about our main message, about the writer's intentions being a bit lost, about what we were actually trying to show, because we didn't realise that we were just supposed to be using the script to sort of influence what we were doing, but looking more into the depth of how the script was written, the intentions and stuff like that. So in terms of that, we had a discussion about what we were trying to show through our piece. I think a lot of it was to do with the ideas of feminism, the ideas of like status and like family relationships and family roles. So when looking at that, he said that our piece showed some of those things. He said that it was never like clear to which like the family dynamics, you weren't really certain of all the things that were going on because it was quite confusing with the multi-role. But he said that like that's not necessarily not effective if it was what you were going for in Brecht style. He said because he thought we'd changed it a lot towards Brecht style because the multi-role wasn't written in the script. That was something we chose to do. We should take it even further, looking at this Caryl Churchill play, but taking it even further to adapting it to Brecht's role, because that's what we'd even tried to do. So just take it even further. So still using some of Churchill's influences, some of her intentions that she wrote, but looking at it in terms of a Brecht way of doing it and Brecht style. So in terms of that, he said when he watched it, he felt like there were 3 different families. And so we took that idea and thought about the idea of status. We had a long discussion about potentially the main message to make it more specific, more obvious to an audience, because he said that it wasn't showing different class. So we had a lower class, a middle class and an upper class, and that we could have 3 families with the same names, same relationships, same interactions, but change the variations ever so slightly in like a cycle between the same people playing the same class when they play a certain character to show that class off. And obviously being a certain class would affect the way in which you would play the role. So the upper classes tend to be more frustrated but not as open to showing their anger, whereas the lower classes might be more open to shouting at each other. They would let their temper slide. It's not as much about how society views them as it is the upper class. The idea of accents was brought about, so that's another way in which they're different, the way in which they approach situations. And we felt as well in like the lower classes, women were a lot more allowed to have their own opinions. They're seen as a lot more equal, especially in more modern times. So we thought about the idea that women might have more freedom of speech in those areas, linking to the idea of feminism. So through, obviously, rehearsal, we'd lost the idea of social class, we'd lost the ideas, the main messages, and so this is what we were trying to bring across. So in terms of physical ways we have tried to do this, it became quite complicated. It definitely became a lot more difficult because you had to remember your characterization, you had to remember the kind of character you were playing, and we had to go through the scenes and unpick how characters would react if they were in a different social class. So, for example, one scene where I pour the water and it spills over was supposed to be upper class, and we said we didn't necessarily think that Maisie would be so careless if it was upper class. It wouldn't be that sort of high level of action and the interaction, and it wouldn't be so intense to draw her attention and for the glass to overspill. So we decided to change that so it's in the middle class instead, or the lower class. The idea of the way certain characters react. So we have Hannah get up at one point when she plays Brian, and she's shouting, and she moves the knife from the table to the floor when she slams it. And another thing that probably upper class wouldn't do, but we could exaggerate it with the lower class, and middle class would just sort of be a natural reaction to it. Another thing that we changed were props. We added in more props, which obviously made it more complicated, but I think that we needed that effect. So we had different kinds of cups for lower class, we had different kind of cups for middle, and different kind of cups for upper. We had a decanter for upper and a jug for middle and lower. And it was about acknowledging the logistics of like how we're going to get it on, how we're going to get it off, and like layering it up. Because another point that Chip made while we did our discussion was that the glasses are there, and that Maisie wears, and we've got the scarf and the jackets, but the jackets pile up, so why doesn't everything else? So we decide to choose an object from each character to pile up as well, to show this time progression, to show this continuity, to show that it doesn't end. So we decide to pile up the books, we decide to pile up the glasses, we decide to pile up the coats, so that it's all piling up and it's not just your attention drawn to the coats that look out of place. So I think that when looking at how to do this more, it became quite difficult for us to try and figure it out, but in terms of running with the ideas that we had and making it more into a Brecht style, it's more effective in what he would try and show with Churchill's script rather than what Churchill might try and show, mainly because of the idea that we had about multi-role and about how to use the props and how the characters would react. I think the idea that Mr. Chip said about social class is, the main idea is that if we can set that apart, then the audience will learn for themselves and figure out for themselves what we're trying to show. The idea is that in social class there are different expectations. The idea is in social class there are different ideas about what happened to Susie. Different characters worry more, and I think if we would have looked at it in more depth, we had more time, and if we'd figured that out sooner, we might have unpicked certain scenes that we felt, certain resets that we felt more linked to a certain class, rather than just having it in like a cycle, because then that would show off more about like the difference and set them apart. We also looked at accents. We tried to make these really over-exaggerated, because Brecht sort of did that, but not too comedic that it took away the aspects and the like effects that we were trying to show, but it could be comedic because it's like a total exaggeration, and again shows like these extreme levels. And the main message that social class sort of makes you act a certain way, and again links to the ideas that in social class you have feminism that comes with it, and the idea that women are treated differently or behave differently, expected to behave differently. So yeah.